Hello and welcome to Business 360. I'm Shireen Bhan. The headlines that we're tracking for you this evening. It's a sea of red on the Lal Street as geopolitical concerns roil sentiment. The Sensex and the Nifty post the biggest single-day decline in over 2 months. More than 10 lakh crore rupees of investor wealth is wiped out today. West Asia is on the boil after Israel and Iran engaged directly in airstrikes. At least 6 killed in Israeli airstrikes on central Beirut Medical Center. Tel Aviv says 8 soldiers were killed in 2 separate Hezbollah attacks. Crude oil prices rise as the conflict in West Asia deepens, but the gains remain capped by weak global demand. Top brokerages do not expect prices to cross $80 a barrel. Brokerages expect F&O volumes to shrink gradually after SEBI tightens the rules to curb the frenzy. NSE is likely to be hit harder than the BSE in the near term, but brokerages believe a key overhang is now behind and long-term growth potential remains intact. The Supreme Court allows real estate companies to claim input tax credit for construction of commercial buildings and those specifically built for leasing purposes. Industry seeks clarity on whether similar relief can be replicated for ports, airports, warehouses and data centers. OpenAI raises $6.6 billion from a clutch of investors including Microsoft, Nvidia, SoftBank and Thrive Capital. The company is valued at $157 billion. Google flexes its AI muscle in India. The Gemini chatbot goes live in Hindi and 8 other Indian languages, also launches gold loans and personal loans on the Google Pay app in partnership with Aditya Birla Finance and Muthoot Finance. Supreme Court restrains police action at Sadhguru's Isha Foundation. Apex Court transfers the case from the Madras High Court to itself. The parents of 2 women claim that they're being forcibly held at the foundation, but the women in question reject the allegation. All of that and more coming up, but first up, the market action. It's a sea of red on the Lal Street today as geopolitical concerns roil sentiment. So the Nifty and the Sensex posted the biggest single-day decline that we've seen in 2 months, closing over 2% lower. The Sensex down 1,769 points. The Nifty lost over 500 points today. Mid-caps also taking a knock. 1,300 points gone on the Nifty mid-cap, and the Nifty Bank lost about 2% today. Broader markets, as we showed you, also falling in line with the blue chips. 10 lakh crore rupees of investor wealth was wiped out in today's trading session. Prashant is standing by now to wrap up the market action for us. Prashant, selling pressure coming in today, but what's the market opinion on whether we are expecting a bounce back from these levels?
Shireen, markets are oversold by looking at simple indicators in the very near term. I think, RSI, etc., for example, is at about 16 or so. So it does look like it's getting a bit overdone in the very near term. But let me just tell you what's happened, right? There's a confluence of events which have come together in today's session. And I'll just quickly run you through all of them. The first one hit global markets on Wednesday, but we were saved yesterday since we were closed on the account of 2nd of October holiday. I'm talking about Iran, Israel. Global markets have... while global markets in the past, over the last 2-3 years, have rallied on despite conflicts around the world like Russia, Ukraine, and episodic flare-ups in the Middle East, many are wondering if this will see a bigger impact now. Second, perhaps, is a short-term phenomenon, and this is the shock China rally, driving almost FOMO-led inflows into that market, and perhaps being funded by big outperformers like India. So money out of India, at least in the very near term, markets like India into, what is going up and up, that is China. Number 3, we're also looking at the second quarter corporate earnings season perhaps being a little subdued. Remember, Q1 was also weak, but it was explained away by companies and analysts alike by saying, well, there were elections, there were heat waves, etc., etc. Remember, we just got the pre-quarterly update from Dabur, and it was a bit of a shock surprise on the negative side. Lastly, SEBI's F&O curbs, which were, while widely anticipated and advertised, and they were in line with what was proposed in the month of July, they're ultimately at the margin, and markets move on incremental news flow, positive or negative. They are going to be negative for market volumes down the line when they come into effect. So just to summarize what we've done on the markets from the highs, from the recent highs, and the highs are different for the Nifty, Bank Nifty, mid and small cap indices in terms of dates, but from the highs, the Nifty is down about 4%, the Bank Nifty is down almost 5%, the mid cap index is down about 3%, and the small cap index is down about 3.5% as well. I also looked at banks and non-banks in the Nifty and how they've done from their respective highs. These are the top losers Axis is down 8, HDFC Bank is down 5.5%, and ICICI Bank is down 5.5%. Remember, bank stocks, according to many, were just starting their move higher, and well, this is what's happened. Non-banks in the Nifty, top loser from the highs is Reliance, which has lost almost about 8%. And then you've got these auto names, Tata Motors, Bajaj, Maruti, which have lost between 6 and 7%. There is also a L&T, which is down about 6% or so. Small caps, and what they've done from their recent peak. So small cap index made a peak before the Nifty or the Bank Nifty did. Sterling Wilson Solar, top loser there, 20% cut. Tita got down 18, Data Patterns and Raymond, some of the other stocks. So you just get a sense of, the damage which we've seen. Names like Zensar, Tejas Network and Natco are some of the others. So anything between 13 and 20% so far, depending on what happens next. I just want to wrap this up with some of the very, very near-term triggers, right? And this may determine what happens from here. Geopolitics is one, of course. That is actually number one. That will be the dominant driver. Israeli retaliation, especially, one of the main channels through which these conflicts impact markets is through energy markets. And there are reports which suggest that, well, there could be strikes on Iranian oil facilities. If that happens, there could be a flare-up in oil prices. US data tomorrow will be important. We get the non-farm payrolls number, the jobs data, monthly one, right before markets open tomorrow. And that will give us a sense, weak or strong, whether the Fed is actually ahead of the curve or behind the curve. Remember, they cut 50 basis points last. With respect to China, what's gotten markets really excited is fiscal measures, right? But it's still in the realm of news reports, and this will happen, that will happen. We don't have official confirmation. And I think it'll be key to watch when China comes back from holidays, whether they actually walk the talk. And lastly, we kick off the festive season with Navratri, and demand trends will be very, very keenly watched. As I said earlier, Q2 is expected to be weak, and markets are looking ahead at H2 of FY25 for earnings to start to pick up. So some things in the very near term which perhaps determine where we go from here. Back to you.
All right, Prashant, many thanks for joining us. As Prashant was pointing out, a confluence of events weighing on our markets. But as Prashant was also pointing out, stock markets in China are shut till the 7th of October for National Day celebration. Stocks in Shanghai posted the best rally in 16 years on Monday. Before that, holiday shares in Hong Kong also rallied in tandem with mainland China earlier this week. But that rally cooled off today with the Hang Seng losing 1%, snapping a 6-day winning streak. But Japan's Nikkei gained in trade. Stock markets in South Korea are shot today. So it is that shock rally in China that's taken people by surprise. And speaking of China, Ben Powell, the chief investment strategist at BlackRock, believes global investors will look to move their money from other emerging markets into China. However, he also adds that India's long-term outlook continues to look good. Take a look.
I think, look, there's a lot to like in India, as you guys are extremely aware. So the combination of demographic plus productivity gains, digital inclusion, infrastructure, and so forth. I think the big picture in India continues to look very, very favorable. I do think if China is going to follow through on its stimulus promises, which we may see as soon as next week, it's quite likely that some of the money that global investors have put to work outside of China, be that in other emerging markets or other parts of Asia, probably gets pulled back into China.
Well, that's the markets, but let's talk about the big global story. West Asia continues to be on the boil as tensions between Iran and Israel escalate. At least 6 people have been killed in Israeli airstrikes on a central Beirut medical center that's affiliated to the Hezbollah. Residents of the Lebanese capital heard several explosions across the city. Meanwhile, Israeli Defense Forces said 8 soldiers were killed in clashes with Hezbollah. It's been more than 36 hours since Iran fired 118 missiles at Israel in response to the killing of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu warned that Iran would pay for it and he would choose the right time to respond. Israel's ally, US President Joe Biden, has said he will not support any attack by Israel on Iranian nuclear sites. However, he added that G7 nations agree that Israel has the right to respond.
Iran made a big mistake tonight, and it will pay for it. The regime in Iran does not understand our determination to defend ourselves and our determination to defend against our enemies.
The security of the region is the security of all Muslims, and we do not want any war or bloodshed. We were left with no choice but to respond. If Israel decides to retaliate, then it will face harsher reactions.
Iran has gone way it's way off course. We're going to put together a joint statement. Hasn't been done yet. It'll be done before too long, probably by the time we land. And there's going to be some sanctions imposed on Iran. We'll be discussing with the Israelis what they're going to do, but all 7 of us agree that they have a right to respond, but they should respond in proportion.
And staying with tensions in West Asia, at least 51 people have died in southern Gaza after Israeli airstrikes and a ground operation targeting the Khan Yunis area. According to Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry, tanks reportedly advanced into some parts of the city and its surrounding area, with residents reporting gunfire and heavy shelling. Separately, the Israel Defense Forces said that they had struck Hamas targets located in 4 schools sheltering displaced people in central and northern Gaza. From one conflict to another, Ukraine has said that Russia launched a major drone attack on 15 regions in the country overnight. The Ukrainian Air Force said it had shot down 78 out of 105 Russian drones during the assault. Meanwhile, authorities in Kyiv said that the Air Force had downed around 15 drones in the city and its surrounding areas during an air alert that lasted more than 5 hours. This comes after Russia took full control of a strategic hilltop town in eastern Ukraine. Well, here's the action in the oil market. Oil prices soaring over 5% as the crisis in the Middle East deepens. However, the gains have remained capped due to weak global demand. Brent is currently hovering around the $75 per barrel mark as investors weigh the escalating conflict in the Middle East. Brokerages, though, expect prices to stay below the $80 mark in 2025. Goldman Sachs predicts $77 a barrel. Citi's forecast is the lowest at $60 a barrel. At least 45 container ships have queued up outside major U.S. ports as the biggest dock workers strike in nearly half a century entered day 3. 45,000 port workers from Maine to Texas have started picketing after talks for a new 6-year contract with the U.S. Maritime Alliance employer group broke down. These workers are affiliated to the International Longshoremen's Association. The 14 affected ports handle almost 55% of the container traffic moving in and out of the U.S. A report by Moody's Analytics has said that Indian exports, which rely heavily on these ports, will also be impacted by the strikes. Now back home, shares of the Bombay Stock Exchange surged in trade after SEBI announced measures to tame speculative trading in the F&O market. Brokerages expect NSE's options premiums to be hit harder by these norms than the BSE in the near term. They also expect a gradual shrinkage in F&O volumes. However, they do believe that a key overhang is now behind and long-term growth potential remains intact. Tata Electronics has resumed some operations at its plant in Tamil Nadu, which produces components for Apple iPhones after a fire broke out in the facility last week. The company said that all employees will continue to receive full payment after resuming work. Tata Electronics has received approval from the Director of Industries to resume operations at the fire-impacted plant. Now, the Income Tax Department has secured a major victory in the Supreme Court. The top court has upheld the tax department's power to issue reassessment notices from April 2021 under the old tax regime. Ashmit is here to give us a background to this case and explain the significance. Ashmit, many thanks. A big leg up for the Revenue Department.
Well, big leg up for the tax department, and clearly clarity coming in for as many as 90,000 reassessment cases. Bear in mind, this reassessment was for the period of between 2013-14 and 2017-18. Now, within this period, now it's important to understand that under the income tax department, reassessments cannot be done for an indefinite period of time. There is a time bar that is geared into the Income Tax Act. During the COVID pandemic, the deadline, the issue that arose, and this was something that was flagged by the government, they came out with a legislation that provided for an extension of this deadline for assessments, for reassessments that were falling within that COVID pandemic. This was defined, the deadline was extended till 30th of June 2021. The problem arose when through Finance Act of 2021, there was a revamped version of this reassessment scheme, which became effective as of 1st of April 2021, and thereby raising the confusion and the chaos as to what happens to reassessment notices issued between 1st of April 2021 and 30th of June 2021. There were 90,000 of them. The question that arose is that, do those reassessments have to be done under the old regime or the new regime? The tax department had issued those 90,000 notices under the old regime. That has been answered in favor of the tax department. The Apex Court has held that mere enactment of a new regime, which is the Finance Act of 2021, does not bar the tax department's hand from going ahead and issuing those reassessment notices under the prior regime. This, of course, is subject to a huge number of safeguards and caveats that the apex court has added. But what it effectively does is that the old regime is still kosher, is still good for reassessment notices that were issued after 1st of April 2021.
Well, Ashmit, it's also been a busy day for you in court, from ordering a reprieve for the Isha Foundation to slamming states over stubble burning. Take us through the other big developments at the apex court today.
Well, here's a quick wrap at three major cases. Number one, the Isha Foundation. As far as the Isha Foundation case is concerned, Isha Foundation Ashram in Coimbatore was subject to a police investigation. There were 150 police personnel that visited the ashram compound. Now, this is something that was falling out of the Madras High Court interim verdict, interim order, whereby the Madras High Court had taken note of a parent's complaint alleging that their children were brainwashed and were kept inside the ashram. Today, this hearing moved towards the apex court. The monks appeared virtually before the apex court. Chief Justice Chandrachud had a private hearing with the monks in question and then finally concluded that they appear to be staying at the ashram of their own volition. And with that in mind, the apex court has stayed the Madras High Court order, has transferred the proceedings to itself and said that there is no further coercive action that will be done by the police agencies. That's one. Second, as far as the Delhi air pollution matter is concerned, bear in mind, we are on the cusp of the winter season, and this is the time the conversation comes up on stubble burning. This conversation has already begun in the apex court. The Supreme Court is not happy. Justice Oak today made strong observations about the conduct of Punjab and Haryana government, saying that they're clearly not doing enough to check stubble burning. There are no penalties in place. Also hitting out at the CAQ and the management panel, which in fact the apex court criticized for not doing enough, not even holding enough meetings to consider solutions to that. So that is something that the apex court is seeking answers on from all stakeholders. That's the Delhi, Punjab, Haryana government, as well as the CAQM. And finally, on the issue of caste discrimination in jails, there was a PIL that had been filed before the apex court. The Supreme Court took note of that and has taken very strong objection, passed a detailed order saying that this caste discrimination that is done within jails, which is allocation of work and allocation of barracks depending on what your caste is something that is a colonial hangover, is not permissible under the Indian constitutional framework, needs to be set aside, and thereby directions being given to the centre as well as to all states and union territories to revamp the prison manuals to accommodate for those caste discriminations, to do away with that at an institutional level.
All right, Ashmit, appreciate you joining us. So the big developments in court today. We will head into a break, but up next, Google flexes its AI muscle in India. The Gemini chatbot goes live in Hindi and 8 other languages. That and more when we return. In what comes as relief for real estate players, the Supreme Court has allowed them to avail input tax credit on construction costs for commercial buildings. Now, this order allows players to claim the input tax credit retrospectively. We hear that industry is seeking similar relief for ports, airports, factories, warehouses and other sectors. Timsy joins us now to take us through the impact of the latest Supreme Court decision. Timsy.
Well, that's right. Fostering greater investment in the commercial real estate sector, a big GST relief has come in for this particular segment, especially which has players such as DLF, Max Estates, Bharti Realty and many others. Supreme Court today has allowed real estate players to avail input tax credit on construction cost of commercial buildings and buildings specifically created for leasing activity. Buildings can now, after this ruling, be considered as plant and machinery, thus giving a benefit of input tax credit. We are also understanding from experts that the input tax credit can now be claimed retrospectively on all these activities and on these buildings. Meanwhile, industry, however, is seeking clarity from the government that whether similar relief should be replicated for sectors such as ports, airports, factories, warehousing, data center, etc., which could be a bigger benefit for the industry. Also, it is understood that now the rental costs will get reduced for tenants as ITC will be available, thus reducing the financial burden. Just to remind our viewers, till now input tax credit was not available on these rentals or on construction of commercial buildings, as it was considered immovable property. Leasing income attracts 18% GST, and Supreme Court relief came in a matter of safari retreats versus Revenue Department. However, the constitutional challenge has been dismissed by the Supreme Court in favor of the Revenue Department. Let's see what are the implications.
Timsy, many thanks. Now, Google has announced a slew of new updates at its 10th edition of its Google for India event in the capital. The company laid out its long-term plan for India and focused on boosting its artificial intelligence roadmap. Shivani joins us now with the key highlights. Shivani.
Well, at the Google for India flagship event, several major announcements were made. Google launched Gemini Live in Hindi and 8 other Indian languages, enhancing AI accessibility across the country. Personal loans will now be available on Google Pay through a partnership with Aditya Birla Finance, along with gold-backed loans via Muthoot Finance. Another significant announcement that was made was in the healthcare segment, where Google has said that over 600 million Ayushman Bharat health account holders will now be able to access their digital health cards on Google Wallet starting next year. Google has also highlighted its success in preventing scams worth rupees 13,000 crores and unveiled plans to pilot enhanced fraud protection within Google Play Protect. Furthering its digital and clean energy commitments, Google announced the opening of Google Safety Engineering Center in India by 2025. Additionally, Google Cloud introduced the Gemini Agent framework to empower Indian businesses. Lastly, but not the least, Google confirmed partnerships to add 186 megawatts of clean energy to India's grid by 2026 through collaborations with the Adani Group as well as CleanMax. Back to you.
Okay, Shivani, many thanks. Now, the much-awaited Hyundai India IPO set to be launched on the 14th of October. It's started to be India's biggest IPO ever. So 14th of October is the D-date. And with that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of Business 360. The news will continue right here on CNBC TV 18. Do stay tuned. We're back in a moment after this very short break.